Alan Mendoza. He's Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society, a transatlantic foreign policy and security think tank. Alan, great to have you back on as well. It's interesting that even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been talking about this war in Ukraine representing a potential shift to a new world order. China's name being mentioned. We're seeing NATO expanding with Sweden and Finland joining the club. Is this going to be enough to tilt things back in the favour of the West, or is the West, when it comes to economic and military might, in a sort of inevitable decline?
Well, it's not an inevitable decline. You're in decline if you choose to be in decline on these sort of issues. And NATO is showing it's choosing not to be in decline. On the contrary, it's choosing to be vigorous. It's choosing to be expansionist in the sense of, allowing others to join it if it wants to. It is still a defensive alliance, let's not forget. It's not targeted at others, but it is there to defend its members against external threats, of which Russia is clearly the most obvious one in this regard. It will need more money to fund that, and people have to be serious about that. There have been commitments to move that forward, but we do need to accept that it will cost more to defend ourselves, because the world, unfortunately, is a more dangerous place than what it was even 5 years ago.
What strikes me as something that hasn't been talked about a lot in recent weeks is the fact that when we look at the history of how Russia's been able to build up power and influence and leverage now threats across the whole world, it's come through a huge amount of trade, whether that is in grain, whether that is in fertilizer, whether that is in energy, and he's able to precipitate crises in all those sectors. Are we not facing the same issue when it comes to China, whose might is being expanded through the Belt and Road Initiative? And the UK, for example, has doubled its trade with Beijing in the last decade. Is that something we need to be looking at very closely, rather than just expanding NATO?
Absolutely. We produced a paper here a couple of years back looking at strategic dependency of the Five Eyes countries on China. And we discovered that in key sectors, key areas, whether it is in health or whether it is in food supply or others, we are heavily dependent on China as a supplier. And that's a problem because, of course, as we've seen in the Russian context, if you are strategically dependent on a country for something that you absolutely need to have, that creates enormous sort of problems for you should you end up in an argument with that country. And what we suggested at the time was that we should use this period right now when we're not in active conflict with China, knowing that China is indeed a competitor rather than a friend, and potentially itself is flouting international law and seeks to do the same perhaps going forwards, that we should use this opportunity to divest, if you like, from Chinese supply in key areas and either create our own or go to other sources that are not going to be in competition with the UK national interests. And that's something that absolutely has to happen today.
And what is the significance, therefore, of China's near neighbour Japan being in attendance at the NATO summit?
Well, I think the key to this is obviously people understanding that the threats to the free world are coming from two main sources. We've got the Russian threat, obviously. The second one is China. There are other sources as well. North Korea is a problem. Iran is a problem. But these are of second order compared, of course, to the enormous damage that China and Russia can cause as competitors to the free world. These are unfree nations with autocratic systems of government who, it appears, are happy to flout international laws and break them willy-nilly in order to get what they want. That is not something that the neighbours of either find attractive or interesting, and that is why I think we're trying to expand the free world space, if you like, to accommodate all those democracies who wish to stand with us in defence of the international rules-based order.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, fantastic to have you back on the programme. Dr. Alan Mendoza and the Henry Jackson Society.